The migraine hit Thomas Reeve like a freight train just as he stepped into the quantum physics lab. At 32, he was already making a name for himself in temporal theory, but today's experiment was different. The university had finally granted him access to their particle accelerator for his controversial research on closed time-like curves. His colleagues had warned him about pushing boundaries, but Thomas wasn't one to heed caution. Final checks complete, Dr. Reeve announced his assistant, Melissa, from behind a bank of monitors. The containment field is stable. Thomas nodded, rubbing his temples. Let's proceed with the quantum entanglement sequence. The laboratory hummed with energy as the accelerator spun up. Thomas moved to the central console, his fingers hovering over the activation key. Something felt wrong. The frequency was oscillating beyond predicted parameters, but they were too far into the sequence to abort safely. Power surge detected. Melissa shouted. The temporal stabilizers aren't compensating. Lock it down, Thomas ordered, but it was too late. The air around him began to shimmer and distort. He felt a curious sensation, as if his body was simultaneously being pulled apart and compressed. The migraine intensified to blinding levels, and he reached out desperately for something to brace against. Then, nothing. Thomas awoke to the sensation of cold concrete against his cheek. His head throbbed, and the coppery taste of blood lingered in his mouth. Opening his eyes, he found himself in what appeared to be an alleyway. Graffiti adorned the walls in patterns and scripts he didn't recognize. The air carried unfamiliar scents, metallic, synthetic, with undertones of something he couldn't place. What the hell happened? He muttered, struggling to his feet. His clothes were intact, but his lab coat was scorched at the edges. The watch on his wrist had stopped at 3:47 p.m., the exact moment of the experiment. Staggering toward the end of the alleyway, Thomas emerged onto a street that sent a shock wave of disorientation through him. Buildings stretched impossibly high, their facades composed of shifting materials that seemed to ripple with embedded light. Vehicles glided silently a few feet above the ground. The pedestrians wore clothing of unusual textures and designs, and many had visible technological enhancements affixed to their bodies. "Holy shit," Thomas whispered. A digital billboard across the street cycled through advertisements in multiple languages before displaying the date. October 17, 2187. 162 years. He jumped forward 162 years. Thomas leaned against the wall, fighting a wave of nausea as the implications crashed over him. Everyone he knew, his parents, his sister, Melissa, his few friends, they were all dead. Had been dead for a century or more. A public information terminal stood at the corner. Thomas approached it cautiously, placing his hand on the interface. To his surprise, it responded to his touch. "Welcome, visitor," a pleasant voice greeted him. "How may the Chicago Municipal Network assist you today?" At least he was still in Chicago. That was something. "I need information on temporal displacement," Thomas said tentatively. The terminal paused. "That is a restricted topic. Citizen identification required for access to classified theoretical physics databases." Thomas swore under his breath. Of course his identification wouldn't work here. He needed to think. If he had somehow created a stable wormhole or initiated a quantum leap through space-time, there might be a way to reverse it. He needed access to research facilities, needed to understand how temporal mechanics had evolved over the intervening years. "Can you direct me to the nearest university physics department?" he asked. The North American University Consortium, Chicago Division, is located 3 kilometers north of your position. "Would you like transit directions?" "Yes, please." The terminal displayed a route on its screen, and Thomas committed it to memory. As he turned to leave, his gaze caught a news headline scrolling across the bottom of the display. "Temporal Enforcement Division apprehends third chrono fugitive this month." Thomas froze. Temporal Enforcement Division? Were there others like him? Or was time travel now commonplace enough to require regulation? Either way, it suggested he needed to be careful. If there were authorities specifically tasked with dealing with temporal anomalies, he might be considered a fugitive simply by existing here. The walk to the university gave Thomas time to observe this new world. Despite the technological advancements evident everywhere, people seemed fundamentally unchanged. They hurried along with purpose, conversed in small groups, laughed at shared jokes. It was both comforting and deeply alienating. The university campus sprawled across what Thomas recognized as the former Lincoln Park area. The buildings were architectural marvels of glass, composite materials, and what appeared to be living plant matter integrated into the structures themselves. Students moved between buildings, many interacting with holographic interfaces that hovered before them. Thomas approached what seemed to be the main administration building, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. The security scanner at the entrance bathed him in pale blue light as he passed through. "Unrecognized biomarkers detected," announced a security system. "Please state your business, visitor." Before Thomas could respond, an alarm began to sound. Red lights pulsed along the corridors. "Temporal anomaly detected," the system announced. "Security protocols initiated. Please remain where you are." Thomas did the opposite. He ran. Dodging confused students and staff, he raced through the complex, searching for an exit. Security drones deployed from recesses in the ceiling, tracking his movements. He ducked into what appeared to be a research laboratory, slamming the door behind him. "That was impressive," said a voice behind him. "Most temporals don't make it past the outer perimeter scanners." Thomas whirled around to face a young woman with short dark hair and eyes that shifted color like opals. She sat calmly at a workstation, a complex three-dimensional model rotating in the air before her. "I am not," Thomas began, but stopped. Denying what he was seemed pointless. "How did you know?" The woman stood, her movements graceful and deliberate. "The molecular degradation patterns are distinctive. Your cells are still adjusting to the timestream shift." She studied him curiously. "You, not using a stabilizer. That's unusual." "I didn't exactly plan this trip," Thomas admitted. The woman approached, unafraid. "An accident, then? Interesting." She extended her hand. "I am Dr. Alara Chen, Temporal Physics Division." Thomas hesitated, then shook her hand. "Dr. Thomas Reeve." Her eyes widened slightly. "The Thomas Reeve? Author of Quantum Entanglement as a Vehicle for Temporal Displacement." It was Thomas's turn to be surprised. "You read my work?" "Read it? Dr. Reeve, your theories formed the foundation of modern temporal mechanics. Your disappearance in 2025 became one of the great mysteries in scientific history." Alara studied him with newfound intensity. "And now I understand why. You didn't disappear. You displaced forward." Before Thomas could process this revelation, the laboratory door shuttered under impact. "Temporal enforcement," announced a mechanized voice. "Open by order of the Chrono Protection Act of 2149. Alara grabbed Thomas's arm. "Come with me if you want to avoid becoming a permanent exhibit in the Temporal Anomalies Containment Facility." She pressed her palm against a section of wall that looked no different from any other, and a hidden door slid open. Without any better options, Thomas followed her into the darkness beyond. The door ceiling shut behind them just as the laboratory entrance gave way. In the dim emergency lighting of the hidden passage, Alara turned to him, her color-shifting eyes serious. "I have so many questions for you, Dr. Reeve. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe." Thomas nodded, his mind reeling from everything that had happened. "I just want to find a way back home." "Back to 2025? Alara's expression was unreadable. "That might be more complicated than you think." As they hurried through the passage, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that his life had irreversibly changed. And somehow, this mysterious woman who knew his work better than he did himself might be his only ally in a world where his very existence was apparently illegal. The maintenance tunnels beneath the university complex twisted like arteries through the foundation of the building. Alara moved confidently through the darkness, her palm occasionally brushing against sensors that Thomas couldn't see, unlocking passages and redirecting security systems. "How far does this network extend?" Thomas asked, trying to memorize their route. "Throughout most of the academic district," Alara replied, her voice low. "They were built during the climate crisis of the 2070s as emergency evacuation routes. Now they mostly forgotten, except by those of us who need to move around undetected." Thomas noted the implication. "You do this often? Help fugitives from time?" Alara's laugh was unexpectedly melodic. "You'd be surprised how frequently temporal accidents occur. Though most aren't nearly as historically significant as you." They emerged into what appeared to be an abandoned subway station, its walls covered in bioluminescent moss that cast everything in a soft blue glow. Alara led him to a small alcove containing what looked like maintenance equipment. "We need to get you change," she said, rummaging through a storage unit. "Your clothing screams early 21st century. And we need to mask your temporal signature." She handed him a set of clothes: black pants made of a material that felt like liquid silk, a gray tunic with subtle circuitry woven into the fabric, and a jacket that seemed to shift color depending on the angle of light. "What about my temporal signature?" Thomas asked as he slipped the jacket on. It adjusted to his frame instantly, tightening slightly around the shoulders. Alara produced a bracelet of braided metal. "This is a crude temporal stabilizer. It won't hide you completely from TED scanners, but it should dampen your displacement radiation enough to avoid casual detection." Thomas examined the device. "The entanglement principles are similar to what I was working on, but the miniaturization is." He shook his head in wonder. "Your work," Alara reminded him, snapping the bracelet onto his wrist. It tightened automatically, tiny needles extending into his skin. Thomas winced at the sudden pain. "Sorry," she said, not sounding particularly apologetic. "It needs direct interface with your bloodstream to monitor and adjust your molecular cohesion." "So what now?" Thomas asked, flexing his wrist as the initial discomfort faded. "Now we need to get to my lab. The one on campus was just my official workspace. My real research happens elsewhere." Alara activated what looked like an antique touchscreen embedded in the wall. "Transportation will be here in 3 minutes." Thomas leaned against the wall, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried him through the last few hours was waning, leaving him drained. "You believe me, then? About who I am?" Alara's expression softened slightly. "The temporal scanners don't lie. Your molecular structure is consistent with early 21st century atmospheric exposure patterns. And your biorhythms show the characteristic desynchronization of recent temporal displacement." She paused. "Plus, you look exactly like the historical records." "There are records about me?" "You, the father of practical temporal theory," Alara said, as if it were obvious. Every physics student studies the Reeve equations in their first year. Before Thomas could process this information, a low humming sound filled the station. A transport pod glided into view, a sleek, egg-shaped vehicle that hovered a foot above the old tracks. "Our ride," Alara announced, placing her palm against the door. It dissolved rather than opened, reforming after they had stepped inside. The interior was surprisingly spacious, with 2 reclining seats that molded themselves to Thomas's body as he sat down. There were no visible controls, but the pod began moving as soon as they were settled. "Destination locked," announced a soft voice. 22 minutes to arrival." Thomas watched through the transparent ceiling as they accelerated through the old subway tunnels. "Where exactly are we going?" "The periphery," Alara replied, studying something on a flexible display that had materialized in her hand. "It's where those who prefer to exist outside the central network live and work." "You, an outcast?" Thomas couldn't reconcile this with her university position. Alara smiled enigmatically. "I maintain a foot in both worlds. The university provides resources and legitimacy. The periphery provides freedom from certain constraints." As they traveled, Alara explained more about the world Thomas had landed in. After the climate wars of the mid-21st century and the subsequent AI integration crisis, society had reorganized around technological access and control. The central network, essentially a merger of government and the dominant tech conglomerates, managed most urban centers and resources. "And time travel?" Thomas asked. "When did that become possible?" "The first successful laboratory temporal displacement was achieved in 2079, Alara said. A quantum physicist sent a molecule back in time by 3 milliseconds. Within a decade, they were sending simple organisms. By the 2120s, human trials began. And now? Now it's a heavily regulated technology. The Temporal Enforcement Division was established after the Second Chinese Dynasty attempted to change the outcome of the climate wars by sending back military advisors. Alara's expression darkened. The resulting temporal fractures nearly collapsed our reality. Since then, all unauthorized temporal activity is classified as a Class 1 offense. Punishable by what? Molecular dissolution, Alara said matter-of-factly. At Thomas's horrified expression, she added, "It's considered more humane than keeping temporal anomalies in containment. The chronodegradation process is Unpleasant to witness. Thomas felt a chill run through him. And that's what awaits me if I am caught. Unless you can prove you came here by accident and have no intention of altering the timeline. I just want to go home, Thomas said quietly. Alara studied him for a long moment. That might be possible, but not easy. The pod began to slow as they approached their destination. Through the windows, Thomas could see they had left the underground tunnels and were now traveling through what appeared to be the ruins of an old industrial district. Many of the buildings showed signs of advanced decay, but others had been repurposed, their facades alive with holographic displays and strange mechanical constructions. Welcome to the periphery, Alara said as the pod came to a stop. Stay close to me. It's not dangerous if they think you belong, but outsiders can attract unwanted attention. They exited into what had once been a warehouse but now served as a transportation hub. Dozens of pods similar to theirs arrived and departed from various platforms. The crowd was unlike any Thomas had seen at the university. People with extensive cybernetic modifications mingled with others dressed in what appeared to be deliberately archaic clothing. Street vendors sold food and technology from improvised stalls. Alara led him through the crowd with confidence, occasionally nodding to individuals who regarded her with varying degrees of respect and wariness. They eventually arrived at a converted factory building. A security scan admitted them to a freight elevator that descended deep below the surface. Home sweet home, Alara announced as the elevator doors opened onto a cavernous laboratory space. It was a chaotic blend of cutting-edge technology and jury-rigged equipment. Multiple holographic displays showed complex equations Thomas partially recognized as evolved versions of his own work. You live here? Thomas asked, taking in the small living area in one corner. I work here, Alara corrected. I sleep here when necessary. She gestured to a diagnostic bed in the center of the lab. I need to run a full temporal analysis on you. The university scanners only gave us basic readings. Thomas hesitated, but ultimately lay down on the bed. A canopy of sensors descended from the ceiling, enveloping him in a web of light. Try to relax, Alara advised, moving to a control panel. This one, hurt, but it might feel strange. Strange was an understatement. As the scan progressed, Thomas felt as if every atom in his body was being gently vibrated at different frequencies. The sensation wasn't painful, but it left him profoundly aware of his own molecular structure in a way he never experienced. After several minutes, the scanning field dissipated. Alara was staring at the results with an expression Thomas couldn't interpret. What is it? He asked, sitting up. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, she said slowly. But this confirms something I suspected. Your displacement wasn't just spatial temporal. They shifted slightly into an adjacent probability stream. Meaning? This isn't exactly your future, Thomas. It's a future. One of many possible futures stemming from your original timeline. She pulled up a complex dimensional model. See these variance patterns? They suggest a probability divergence of approximately 3.8%. Thomas studied the model, recognizing the implications. So even if I could go back to 2025, it might not be your 2025, Alara finished. And attempting to return could create a new branch reality or, worse, cause a collapse of both probability streams. Thomas sat heavily on the edge of the diagnostic bed. So I am trapped here. Not necessarily trapped, Alara corrected, her tone softening. But returning is more complicated than simply reversing the temporal vector of your displacement. She hesitated, then added, there's something else. The chrono-radiation from your displacement is degrading your cellular cohesion at an accelerated rate. Without intervention, you'll experience complete molecular breakdown within 6 to 8 weeks. The clinical way she delivered this death sentence made it somehow more terrifying. Can you stop it? I can slow it, Alara said, already moving to a storage unit and retrieving vials of luminescent fluid. These stabilizers will buy us time to find a more permanent solution. As she prepared an injection, Thomas noticed her hands were trembling slightly, the first crack in her composed demeanor. Why are you helping me? He asked suddenly. Alara paused, meeting his eyes. Your work on quantum entanglement and temporal theory saved my life. Before Thomas could ask what she meant, an alarm blared throughout the laboratory. Holographic screens flickered to security feeds showing armored figures approaching the building. Temporal enforcement, Alara said grimly, quickly administering the injection to Thomas's arm. They must have tracked your signature despite the dampener. What do we do? Thomas asked, rubbing his arm where the needle had entered. Alara moved swiftly around the lab, activating defenses and gathering equipment. They got about 3 minutes before they breached the outer security perimeter. Grab that bag and fill it with the blue vials from the refrigeration unit. As Thomas complied, Alara continued, there's an emergency exit through the maintenance shaft. It leads to an old storm drainage system. We'll have to separate once we re-clear. You'll be easier to track if we re-together. I don't even know where to go, Thomas protested. Alara pressed a small device into his hand. This has coordinates to a safe house. Memorize them, then destroy the device. She looked at him intently. Can I trust you, Thomas Reeve? The question caught him off guard. I am the one putting my life in your hands. And I am risking everything to help you, she countered. The TED doesn't look kindly on those who harbor temporal fugitives. If they catch me, I'll be facing the same molecular dissolution that awaits you. The reality of their situation struck Thomas with full force. This woman, essentially a stranger, was risking her life for him based solely on his scientific legacy, a legacy he hadn't even created yet from his perspective. You can trust me, he said firmly. Alara nodded once, apparently satisfied. She handed him a weapon that looked like a cross between a pistol and a medical device. Temporal disruptor. It won't kill them, but it will scramble their chrono shields long enough for you to get away. Last resort only. Using it leaves a trace signature. The security feeds showed the TED forces deploying what appeared to be perimeter sensors around the building. Time to go, Alara said, hitting a sequence of commands that initiated what was clearly a data purge of her systems. Remember, once we re-out, we separate. Meet me at the safe house in 12 hours. She led him to what looked like a maintenance closet at the back of the lab. The false wall slid aside, revealing a narrow passage. Ladies first, Thomas said, attempting humor to mask his fear. Alara actually smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Such an anachronism, she teased, but entered the passage ahead of him. As the wall sealed behind them, plunging them into darkness illuminated only by emergency lighting strips along the floor, Thomas wondered if he would ever see his own time again, or if this strange future with this enigmatic woman was now his only reality. Thomas emerged from the drainage tunnel into the harsh glare of artificial lighting. Night had fallen over the city, but darkness seemed a foreign concept in this future world. Every building, vehicle, and even some pedestrians emanated their own light sources, creating a kaleidoscope of color that made Thomas's already throbbing head pound harder. We split up here, Alara whispered beside him. She pressed something small and cold into his palm. Swallow this. It's a bio-tracker that will let me find you if something goes wrong. Thomas examined the tiny silver capsule. You want me to swallow technology I don't understand from a future I don't belong in? A hint of a smile touched Alara's lips. Says the man who accidentally invented time travel. When he still hesitated, she added, it's standard medical tech, completely biocompatible. It will dissolve in about 36 hours. Thomas sighed and swallowed the capsule. It went down easily, leaving a faint metallic taste in his mouth. The safe house coordinates are in the device I gave you, Alara continued. Memorize them, then crush the device under your foot. The enzymatic acid inside will destroy any traceable components. And if I get lost? You want tea, she said with surprising confidence. The temporal stabilizer I injected you with has a mild cognitive enhancement effect. Your brain is processing information about 20% faster than normal right now. As if to confirm her words, Thomas realized he had already memorized the complex sequence of coordinates and could visualize the route through the unfamiliar city with startling clarity. 12 hours, Alara reminded him. She hesitated, then quickly squeezed his hand. Stay alive, Thomas Reeve. History says you disappeared, not that you died. Before he could respond, she was gone, slipping into a crowded thoroughfare and instantly becoming indistinguishable from the other pedestrians. Thomas crushed the device under his heel as instructed, watching as it dissolved into a briefly smoking puddle that evaporated within seconds. Taking a deep breath, he headed in the opposite direction from Alara, trying to project the confident stride of someone who belonged in this century. The city at night was a sensory overload. Advertisements projected directly into his field of vision when he passed certain storefronts, the technology somehow sensing his presence despite his lack of modern implants. Food vendors offered cuisine that defied categorization, combining elements of various cultures with synthetic components. Vehicles of all shapes and sizes moved through designated aerial corridors above the pedestrian levels. Despite his enhanced cognition, Thomas felt a profound alienation. This was humanity's future, but it felt as foreign to him as an alien civilization. The architecture, the technology, the casual body modifications sported by many pedestrians, it all spoke of a society that had evolved far beyond the one he knew. His stomach growled, reminding him that despite the chaos of dimensional displacement, his body still had basic needs. He approached a food stall that was selling something that at least resembled skewered meat. "How much?" he asked the vendor, a woman with intricate circuitry embedded in her forearms that glowed blue beneath her skin. She glanced at him curiously. "Credit transfer or biometric?" Thomas froze. Of course he had no way to pay. Before he could retreat, the vendor sighed and held out a skewer. "First one's free for newcomers to the periphery," she said. They got that look. "What look?" Thomas asked, accepting the food gratefully. "Like someone who doesn't know which way is up yet." She studied him more closely. "Integration refugee?" Thomas seized the offered explanation. "Something like that. Thought so." They still got natural eyes. She tapped beside her own iris, which Thomas now noticed contained tiny, shifting geometric patterns. "Word of advice. Get yourself some basics or you'll stand out. Law's Market, 2 levels down. Tell Bennett that Mari sent you." Thomas thanked her and moved on, devouring the skewer. The meat, if it was meat, had an unfamiliar spice profile, but his hunger made it taste delicious. Following the vendor's advice, he made his way to Law's Market, a sprawling underground bazaar where the economically disadvantaged of this future society conducted their business. Here, at least, things felt more familiar: the hustle of commerce, the haggling over prices, the closely packed stalls selling everything imaginable. It reminded him of markets he visited during research trips to Southeast Asia and the Middle East. He found Bennett's stall near the back of the market, a cluttered space filled with what appeared to be second-hand technology and clothing. The proprietor was an elderly man with a mechanical right arm that moved with surprising delicacy as he sorted tiny components. "Mari sent me," Thomas said by way of greeting. Bennett looked up, his artificial eye whirring as it focused. "Another stray, What do you need?" "Basics. Enough to blend in." The old man grunted and began assembling items on the counter between them. "No credit?" Thomas shook his head. "Labor trade, then. Market always needs maintenance workers. 6 hours for the basics package." It seemed fair enough. "Deal." The basics package turned out to include a set of cosmetic eye filters that gave his irises the same subtle technological appearance common in this society, a rudimentary communicator that attached behind his ear, and a small device Bennett called a civilian-grade neural assistant. "It's just an interface, not a true implant," Bennett explained, showing Thomas how to apply the flat, circular device to his temple. "Gives you access to public information networks. Won't get you through any security, but it'll help you fake being a functional citizen." Thomas worked his 6 hours helping repair environmental systems in the market's lower levels. The technology was advanced but followed logical principles, and with his enhanced cognition, he picked up the basics quickly. By the time his shift ended, he had earned not only his basics package, but also a small credit balance loaded onto a temporary identity chip. "You're not bad with tech for an integration case," his supervisor commented. "Come back if you need more work." With his new accessories in place and a few hours still to kill before meeting Alara, Thomas decided to use his neural assistant to learn more about the world he was trapped in, and about himself. Finding a quiet corner in what appeared to be a public rest area, he activated the device as Bennett had shown him. The sensation was bizarre. Information appeared in his mind as if he had always known it, though he remained aware that it was being fed to him through the device. "Thomas Reeve," he sub-vocalized, testing the search function. Immediately, information flooded his consciousness. Thomas Reeve, 1993–2025, pioneering quantum physicist whose work on entangled particle states laid the theoretical foundation for temporal manipulation technology. Best known for the Reeve equations governing multidimensional probability weaves in quantum fields. Disappeared under mysterious circumstances during an unauthorized experiment at Chicago University on May 17, 2025. Posthumously awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics, 2026, and the John Muller Medal for Temporal Innovation, 2087. There was more, much more, but Thomas pulled back from the data stream, feeling suddenly dizzy. It was surreal to read about his own life and apparent death, to see his contributions to a field that, from his perspective, he had barely begun to explore. He redirected his search. Temporal Enforcement Division. The Temporal Enforcement Division, TED, was established in 2142 following the Chrono Wars that resulted from unauthorized temporal manipulation by state actors. Operating under the authority of the Global Unity Accord, TED is tasked with preventing, detecting, and neutralizing temporal anomalies, incursions, and paradoxes that threaten timeline stability. All temporal displacement technology is regulated under their jurisdiction. Thomas continued researching, letting the hours pass as he absorbed information about the climate wars, the AI integration crisis, the formation of the central network, and the socio-political reorganization that had led to the current state of the world. The more he learned, the more he understood Alara's precarious position. Her university connection put her squarely within the central network's sphere of influence, while her work in the periphery aligned her with those who existed in the margins. A subtle vibration from his communicator alerted him that the appointed meeting time was approaching. Following the memorized coordinates, Thomas made his way through increasingly narrow streets until he reached what appeared to be an abandoned climate control station, a relic of the massive environmental engineering projects undertaken during the climate crisis. The entrance was sealed, but as Thomas approached, a hidden scanner bathed him in soft light. A moment later, the door slid open just enough for him to slip inside. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, a small but well-equipped living space with technology that appeared more advanced than even what he'd seen in public. Alara sat at a holographic workstation, surrounded by floating displays of data. "You made it," she said, looking up. Her expression changed as she took in his altered appearance. "And you've been busy." Thomas touched the eye filters self-consciously. "Trying to blend in. Your friend Mari at the food stall pointed me to Bennett at Law's Market." Alara nodded approvingly. "Good instincts. Mari's part of the network. She helps integration refugees adjust." She gestured to a chair. "Sit. I need to check your molecular stability." Thomas complied, watching as she ran a handheld scanner over his body. "What's an integration refugee, exactly?" "I've been using it as my cover story. Displaced persons from regions devastated by climate collapse or technological warfare," Alara explained, focused on her readings. "Many lost everything, including official documentation. The central network created integration programs to assimilate them into productive society." Her mouth twisted. "It's basically indentured servitude until they work off the debt of their integration. And people in the periphery help them avoid this? When we can." Alara set down the scanner with a frown. "Your cellular degradation has accelerated. The stabilizer should have bought us more time." Thomas felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "How long?" 4 weeks, maybe less." She moved to a storage unit and returned with another injection. "This is a stronger formulation. It will slow the process further, but the side effects are more pronounced. You'll experience sensory distortions, possible memory fluctuations. Not much choice, is there?" Thomas extended his arm. As Alara administered the injection, Thomas studied her face. In the softer lighting of the safe house, she looked younger, more vulnerable than she had in the laboratory. "You said my work saved your life," he said quietly. "What did you mean?" Alara was silent for a long moment, securing the injection site with a small patch that seemed to fuse with his skin. Finally, she sat back and met his eyes. "I was born with a genetic condition called temporal dissociation syndrome. My personal timeline doesn't sync properly with the universal timestream. Before treatment, I would phase in and out of temporal alignment, experiencing hours or days in minutes or vice versa." She pushed up her sleeve, revealing an implant that ran the length of her forearm, pulsing with soft light. This stabilizer uses principles derived directly from your equations to keep me anchored in normal time. Thomas reached out hesitantly, his fingers hovering above the implant. May I? Alara nodded. The implant was worn to the touch, vibrating almost imperceptibly with what Thomas recognized as quantum resonance frequencies, an application of his theoretical work that he had only dreamed might be possible someday. Without this, I would have experienced my entire life in what would feel like a few days to everyone else, Alara continued. I would have been an observer, never a participant. Your work gave me a normal lifespan, normal experiences. Thomas struggled to find words. I am glad my research helped someone so directly. Alara withdrew her arm, rolling her sleeve down. It helped millions. Temporal dissociation syndrome affects about 0.3% of the population, a genetic side effect of early climate engineering attempts. She stood abruptly. You must be hungry. They prepared food. The change of subject was obvious, but Thomas didn't press. Instead, he followed her to a small dining area where a meal waited, synthesized protein that approximated beef, vegetables grown using hydroponic methods, and what seemed to be actual, non-synthetic bread. As they ate, Thomas shared what he had learned about the world through his neural assistant searches. Alara filled in details, corrected misconceptions, and gradually painted a more complete picture of the complex society that had evolved. The central network isn't entirely malevolent, she explained. It provides stability, resources, technological advancement. But it demands conformity, submission to its hierarchies and values. And the periphery? Freedom at the cost of security. Innovation without oversight, which can be both liberating and dangerous. Alara sipped from a cup of herbal tea. Most people choose the network's comforts. Only those with specific reasons prefer the margins. Like you, Thomas observed. With a foot in both worlds. Alara smiled faintly. I need the university's resources for my research. They need my expertise in temporal mechanics. And what exactly is your research? Thomas asked. Beyond helping temporal fugitives, I mean. Something flashed in Alara's eyes, caution, perhaps, or calculation. I study probability streams and their intersection points. Trying to find ways to travel between them? Thomas guessed. Among other applications. Alara set down her cup. It's late, and you need rest. The stabilizer will work better if your system isn't overtaxed. She showed him to a small sleeping alcove equipped with a bed that molded itself to his body when he lay down. Despite his mind racing with questions, Thomas found himself drifting off almost immediately. Whether from exhaustion or some property of the bed, he couldn't tell. He dreamed of his laboratory in 2025, of the moment when everything went wrong. But in the dream, he saw what he had missed in reality. The quantum field had not collapsed randomly. It had been pulled, directed by an external force originating from somewhere, or someone else. Thomas awoke with a gasp, his heart racing. The room was dark, but he could make out a figure sitting in a chair near the bed. Another side effect of the stabilizer, Alara's voice came softly through the darkness. Temporal echo dreams. Your mind is trying to process the displacement trauma. It wasn't random, Thomas said, the revelation from his dream still vivid. The accident that sent me here, it wasn't just equipment failure or miscalculation. I know, Alara said simply. Thomas sat up. What do you mean, you know? Instead of answering directly, Alara activated a small light and handed him a tablet. On it was an image of an equation, his equation, but modified, extended in ways he hadn't yet conceived. This is the completed version of the temporal pull theory you were working on before your disappearance, she explained. It describes how a sufficient quantum entanglement field can draw an object or person through time. Thomas studied the equation, understanding dawning with terrible clarity. Someone pulled me here. From this time. Alara nodded. The question is who? And why? And you have no idea? She hesitated, and Thomas knew immediately she was holding something back. Alara, he said firmly. If I am dying of molecular degradation because someone in this time yanked me out of mine, I deserve to know why. It's not that simple, she began, but was interrupted by a sudden alarm from her communicator. Her expression changed instantly to alert focus as she checked the device. Perimeter breach. Ted found us. She was already moving, gathering essential equipment. We have 2 minutes, maybe less. Thomas scrambled from the bed, fully awake now. How did they track us? Unknown. Possibly your temporal signature is stronger than I calculated. She tossed him a bag. Essentials only. We need to move. As Thomas hastily packed the few possessions he had acquired, a thought struck him. The bio-tracker you gave me, could it have been compromised? Alara froze momentarily, then continued her preparations with even greater urgency. Unlikely. The technology is secure, encrypted. But Thomas could see doubt in her eyes. Unless someone had access to your encryption keys. We don't have time for this, Alara snapped, though her expression suggested the possibility troubled her as well. Emergency exit is behind the environmental control panel. As they prepared to leave, Thomas grabbed her arm. I need to know I can trust you, Alara. My life depends on it. For a brief moment, vulnerability showed through her composed exterior. I wouldn't betray you, Thomas. But there are forces at work here beyond my control, beyond either of our understanding. The sincerity in her eyes was convincing, but Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was revealing. Before he could press further, the proximity alert escalated to an urgent warning. They breaching the outer door, Alara said. We have to go. Now. As they slipped through the hidden exit into another maintenance tunnel, Thomas wondered if he was running from danger or merely following it in the form of the enigmatic woman who seemed determined to save him, but perhaps not for the reasons she claimed. The maintenance tunnel seemed endless, twisting through the foundations of the city like an industrial circulatory system. Thomas's lungs burned as he followed Alara through the darkness, their path illuminated only by the occasional emergency light and the soft glow of Alara's temporal implant. We need to get above ground, Alara panted. The density of the surrounding materials is interfering with their chrono trackers, but it won't hold them for long. Where are we going? Thomas asked. The only place left, she replied cryptically. The origin point. Before Thomas could ask what that meant, they reached a vertical shaft with rungs embedded in the wall. Alara began climbing without hesitation. The shaft seemed to stretch upward for hundreds of feet, and by the time they reached the top, Thomas's arms were trembling with exhaustion. Alara pressed her palm against a scanner hidden in the wall. A section of ceiling slid open, revealing a night sky scattered with stars more brilliant than Thomas had ever seen in his own time. Outside the city, he realized as they emerged onto what appeared to be a flat rooftop. The Chicago skyline glittered in the distance, a jeweled landscape of light against the darkness. The old observatory complex, Alara confirmed. Abandoned during the network consolidation. The radiation shielding makes it difficult to scan. The building beneath them was a massive circular structure, clearly once devoted to astronomical observation but long since repurposed. Alara led him to a maintenance door that opened at her touch, revealing a cavernous interior space dominated by what appeared to be a large particle accelerator ring. Not unlike the one in Thomas's own laboratory, but far more advanced. What is this place? Thomas asked, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. My real laboratory, Alara said, activating systems that hummed to life around them. The university facility was just a cover. As lights flickered on throughout the space, Thomas saw that the accelerator ring was connected to a platform at its center. A platform that looked disturbingly like the containment field generator from his original experiment. The origin point, he breathed, understanding dawning. This is where, or when, the pull came from. Alara nodded, moving to a control station. Yes, this is where you were brought through. Why? Thomas demanded. Why pull me out of my time, knowing it would kill me? And why pretend you didn't know? Alara's hands stilled on the controls. When she turned to face him, her expression was a complex mixture of regret and determination. I couldn't tell you everything immediately, she said. I needed to establish trust, to make sure you were the man the historical records described. She gestured toward the complex apparatus. This isn't just a temporal displacement device, Thomas. It's a probability stream convergence engine. Meaning? It doesn't just move people through time. It can merge different probability streams, different versions of reality. Alara approached him, her color-shifting eyes intense. Your disappearance in 2025 wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was a pivotal moment in the timeline. The point where multiple probability streams diverged. Thomas tried to process this. You saying my accident created multiple futures? No, Alara corrected. Your accident was the result of multiple futures attempting to claim you. In some probability streams, you remained in 2025 and completed your work, advancing temporal physics by decades. In others, like this one, you disappeared, leaving others to piece together your theories over centuries. A terrible suspicion formed in Thomas's mind. And you brought me here to, what? Study me? Reverse engineer my thought processes? To save you, came a new voice from the shadows. Thomas turned to see an elderly man emerge from an adjacent chamber. His movements were slow but deliberate, and despite his age, there was something familiar in his bearing, his eyes. Who are you? Thomas asked, though a part of him already knew. The old man smiled sadly. I think you guessed. I am you, Thomas. Or rather, I am what you become in the probability stream where you remained in 2025. Thomas stared at his older self, feeling as if the floor had dropped out from beneath him. That's impossible. Alara said this was a future where I disappeared. It is, the elder Thomas confirmed. But I am not from this timeline. I came here from another probability stream, just as you did. He gestured to Alara. With her help, Alara moved to stand beside the older Thomas. I've been working with Thomas for 5 years now. He approached me after discovering my research on probability stream convergence. I spent decades developing temporal physics, the elder Thomas explained. Eventually, I discovered what had happened that day in my lab. That in multiple probability streams, versions of myself had been pulled forward in time by future technologies attempting to acquire my work. But why? Thomas asked, struggling to comprehend. If you completed the work in your timeline, why would other futures need me? Because in my timeline, I solved the equations but never built a functional displacement device, his older self explained. I was too cautious, too afraid of the consequences after seeing what had happened to my other selves. My theories remained theoretical. While in this timeline, Alara continued, your disappearance led to temporal technology being developed by others. Researchers who didn't share your ethical concerns. The First Temporal War occurred in 2139, nearly destroying civilization. Thomas looked between them, realization dawning. So you, not trying to keep me here. You, trying to send me back. With complete knowledge, the elder Thomas confirmed. So you can build the technology the right way, with the proper safeguards. But the molecular degradation, Thomas said. Alara said I am dying. You are, his older self acknowledged grimly. It's the fundamental problem with temporal displacement. The molecular structure becomes unstable, unable to fully integrate with a time stream not its own. Can you stabilize me long enough to send me back? Alara and the elder Thomas exchanged a look. That's where it gets complicated, she said. The only way to completely stabilize you would be to fully integrate you into this time stream, essentially making you belong here. But doing so would make it impossible to return, Thomas finished. Exactly, the elder Thomas confirmed. It's a paradox. To save your life, we would have to keep you here. But keeping you here means my timeline, the timeline where you develop temporal physics carefully, ethically, never comes to exist. Thomas paced the platform, his mind racing. There must be a solution. Some way to stabilize me enough to survive the return journey. There is, Alara said quietly. But it requires a sacrifice. The elder Thomas nodded. My sacrifice, to be specific. Thomas stopped pacing. What do you mean? Molecular resonance transfer, his older self explained. Since we are fundamentally the same person, my fully stable molecular structure can reinforce yours. Not permanently, but long enough for you to make the return journey. But what happens to you? Thomas asked, though he already suspected the answer. I cease to exist, the elder Thomas said simply. My timeline, my reality, it all becomes a probability wave rather than a fixed reality. I can't ask you to do that, Thomas protested. You, not asking. I am choosing. The older man's eyes were calm, resolute. Lived a full life, Thomas. 77 years. Made contributions to science, had a family, known love and loss. But always lived with the knowledge that my choices created a world where temporal technology developed in the worst possible way. He gestured around them. This facility exists in a probability flux, a bubble where multiple streams converge temporarily. It's how we were able to bring you here, and how we can send you back. But the window is closing. Within hours, the probability flux will collapse, and you'll be trapped here, dying of molecular degradation. Thomas tried to process everything. So I go back, with knowledge of what my work could lead to, and you build it right, Alara finished. Create temporal technology with inherent safeguards, ones that can't be circumvented. Prevent the chrono wars before they can happen. Why didn't you just send him back? Thomas asked, nodding toward his older self. He has all the knowledge too. Because I am too old, the elder Thomas said simply. The return journey would kill me before I could implement what I know. And because the timeline needs to be as close to the original as possible, you disappearing and then reappearing rather than a new person appearing. A loud alarm suddenly blared through the facility. Alara rushed to a monitoring station. Ted forces, she announced grimly. They tracked us. Perimeter breach in approximately 7 minutes. The elder Thomas looked at his younger self. It's now or never, Thomas. The containment field can't shield us from Ted's sensors for long. Thomas felt overwhelmed, but a strange clarity was emerging through the chaos. If I go back and develop the technology properly, does this future, this timeline, cease to exist? Alara answered, her voice soft. Not exactly. It becomes one of many probability waves, less likely but still possible. Those of us here would continue in a diminished probability state. And you? Thomas asked her directly. What happens to you? Something flickered in her eyes. Something Thomas now recognized as fear, carefully controlled. I'll be fine. The probability shift will be gradual enough that most people won't notice the changes. Thomas recognized the lie. Your condition, the temporal dissociation syndrome, it's stabilized by my equations. If I go back and change how my work develops, then my treatment might develop differently, or not at all, Alara acknowledged. But millions of others will never suffer from temporal warfare. It's a fair trade. The elder Thomas was already moving to the control panel. We don't have time for debate. The molecular resonance transfer takes nearly 5 minutes to complete. Thomas stood rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on Alara. In just days, she had become the one constant in this chaotic future. His guide, his protector, and perhaps something more. The thought of her suffering because of his actions was unbearable. There has to be another way, he insisted. There isn't, she said firmly. This is bigger than either of us. Thomas, his older self called urgently. The platform. Now. Thomas moved to the containment field platform but caught Alara's arm as she turned to the controls. Come with me, he said suddenly. She blinked in surprise. What? Come back with me. To 2025. That's impossible, the elder Thomas interjected. The molecular resonance transfer only works because we the same person. Alara's molecular structure would degrade within days if she attempted the journey. Unless we find a way to stabilize her, Thomas argued. The same way her implant stabilizes her now. There's no time to develop such technology, the elder Thomas insisted. The TED will be here in minutes. But Alara was looking at Thomas with a new expression, one that mingled hope with doubt. My implant, she said slowly. It's based on your equations, calibrated to my specific molecular frequency. If we modify the return vector to account for that frequency, Thomas continued, his mind racing with calculations, we could create a linked displacement field. The elder Thomas stared at them both. It's untested. Dangerous. So was pulling me here in the first place, Thomas countered. He turned to Alara. It's your choice. Stay here in a diminishing probability stream, or risk everything on a theory. For the first time since he met her, Alara smiled fully, without reservation. I've based my entire career on your theories, Dr. Reeve. Why stop now? The facility shuddered as something heavy impacted the outer perimeter. The elder Thomas sighed in resignation. If we redoing this, we need to hurry. He began making adjustments to the system. The linked displacement will require precise calibration between your molecular frequencies. How do we do that? Thomas asked. Alara was already removing her temporal implant. Direct neural interface, she explained, wincing slightly as the device detached from her arm. My implant contains my complete molecular signature. If we connect it to the control system, it can generate the necessary entanglement. The elder Thomas worked with surprising speed, integrating Alara's implant into the system while Thomas and Alara positioned themselves on the platform. I am programming a 20-second delay, the older man said. Once the transfer begins, I want to be able to maintain consciousness. Will it hurt you? Thomas asked, suddenly concerned for this older version of himself who was sacrificing everything. A sad smile crossed the elder Thomas's face. Not for long. He looked at them both. Make it count. Build it right. Another impact rocked the facility. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. Outer door breached, an automated system announced. Estimated 3 minutes to inner perimeter compromise. Ready? Thomas asked Alara, who stood beside him on the platform. She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. For the record, she said quietly, this is technically our first date. Despite everything, Thomas laughed. ILL tried to make the second one less apocalyptic. The elder Thomas activated the sequence. Molecular resonance transfer initiating. Linked displacement field generating. He looked up at them one last time. May 17, 2025. 3:47 p.m. The moment you left. That's when you return. The air around the platform began to shimmer with familiar distortion. Thomas felt the strange sensation of simultaneous compression and expansion that had preceded his original displacement. It's working, he heard Alara say, her voice distorted as if coming from underwater. Through the rippling air, Thomas saw TED forces breach the inner door. Temporal enforcement officers in sleek armor poured into the facility, weapons raised. The elder Thomas stood at the controls, his body already beginning to shimmer with the effects of the molecular transfer. Stop, ordered the lead TED officer. Temporal manipulation in progress. System shutdown authorized. The elder Thomas smiled serenely and pressed a final control. Too late, he said. It's already done. The world around them began to dissolve into a kaleidoscope of light and sound. The last thing Thomas saw was his older self raising a hand in farewell as the TED officers converged on him. Then came the familiar migraine, impossibly intense, as reality itself seemed to tear apart and reconstruct around them. Power surge detected. Melissa shouted. The temporal stabilizers aren't compensating. Thomas blinked, disoriented. He was back in his laboratory, the same moment he had left, with Melissa's warning ringing in his ears. But this time, he understood what was happening. It's okay, he called out, his voice steady despite the disorientation. They got it under control. He moved to the central console, fingers flying over the controls with a confidence he hadn't possessed moments ago, or 162 years in the future, depending on perspective. The equations that had once seemed theoretical now made perfect sense as he adjusted the containment field parameters. What are you doing? Melissa asked, staring at the readouts. The system should be overloading, but you re-stabilizing it? Just trust me, Thomas said, completing the sequence. The laboratory hummed as the particle accelerator wound down safely, the potential catastrophe averted. And then he remembered. Alara. He spun around, searching the laboratory. Had it worked? Had she made it through with him? Thomas? Melissa called, concerned. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. The laboratory door opened, and a young woman with short dark hair stepped through, wearing the uniform of a university maintenance worker. Her eyes met Thomas's, and he saw the subtle color shift that marked them as uniquely hers. Sorry to interrupt, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Engineering department sent me to check on the power fluctuation. Relief flooded through Thomas. She had made it. Everything's under control now, he told Melissa. Why don't you take the rest of the day off? I'll finish the calibrations and lock up. Melissa looked confused but didn't argue. If you sure. The readings are stabilizing, but we should probably run a full diagnostic tomorrow. Absolutely, Thomas agreed. First thing in the morning. Once Melissa had left, Thomas crossed to Alara, who was examining the laboratory with undisguised fascination. It worked, he said, hardly believing it himself. It did, she confirmed, rolling up her sleeve to reveal her temporal implant, still active, still keeping her anchored in time. Though I had to improvise some maintenance credentials to get in here. Thomas smiled, remembering their conversation from the future. Technically, this is our second date. Less apocalyptic as promised. Alara laughed, and the sound was as musical as he remembered. I think I like 2025, she said, looking around. It's chaotic, primitive, but hopeful. Thomas moved to the central console, calling up his research files. We have work to do, he said, suddenly serious. We need to build the right safeguards into the foundation of temporal physics, prevent the chrono wars, the TED, all of it. And find a permanent solution for my condition, Alara added. My implant has enough power for about a year, based on current technology. Thomas nodded. We'll figure it out. He looked at her, this woman from a future that might now never exist. I am sorry about him. The other me. He made his choice, Alara said softly. Now we have to make ours. As they bent over the console together, Thomas knew they were already altering the future, creating a new probability stream where temporal physics would develop with proper safeguards, where the chrono wars might never happen. A future they would build together. Outside the laboratory window, the sun was setting over Chicago, casting long shadows across the university campus. In the dying light, Thomas thought he saw a shimmering in the air, a brief distortion like a heat mirage. A reminder that other probability streams still existed, still flowed alongside this one. Somewhere, in some diminished probability, an older version of himself smiled as he faded from existence. Somewhere, TED officers discovered an empty facility, the technology they sought already gone. Somewhere, the future that had been continued in altered form. But here, in this moment, Thomas Reeve and Alara Chen began their work, not just to change the future, but to create it. Months later, Thomas stood at a podium, accepting the Zhang Award for Innovation in Quantum Physics. In the audience, Alara sat in the front row, her hair longer now, her clothing contemporary. To anyone else, she appeared to be simply another bright young physicist, perhaps a student or colleague. The equations I am presenting today, Thomas told the assembled scientists, represent not just a theoretical framework for temporal mechanics, but an ethical one. Every advancement in this field must come with inherent safeguards, protections that cannot be circumvented. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Scientists weren't accustomed to hearing colleagues discuss ethics as an integral part of mathematical equations. Some of you may wonder why I shifted my research focus so dramatically, Thomas continued. Why I built these limitations directly into the foundational mathematics. He looked at Alara, drawing strength from her presence. Let's just say I've seen what happens when we don't. Later, as they walked across the campus beneath a starlit sky, Alara slipped her hand into his. Do you think it worked? She asked. Have we changed enough? Thomas looked up at the stars. The same stars that would shine over a future now altered by their actions. I don't know. They created a new probability stream, but whether it becomes the dominant one depends on so many factors. We could build a device to check, Alara suggested, half joking. Just a small one. Take a peek at 2187. Thomas laughed, pulling her closer. I think they had enough time travel to last a lifetime. Besides, he added, his tone growing serious, I am more interested in experiencing time the traditional way. One day at a time, with you. Alara smiled, her opalescent eyes catching the starlight. One day at a time, she agreed. Though technically, with my condition, some days might feel longer than others. As they continued their walk, Thomas reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together, across time, across probability streams, against impossible odds. He didn't know what future they were building, only that they were building it together. And in the end, that was enough.